Thanks, Nomi. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on taking a fresh look at community eligibility for the 2021-2022 school year. As Nomi said, my name is Allison Perez, and I am a Child Nutrition Policy Analyst with the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. Thanks so much for joining us for today's conversation. We know how busy everyone is, and we really appreciate your interest and participation. We wanted to host this webinar because community eligibility adoption season is upon us, and we want to make sure that eligible schools and districts across the country have the tools they need to figure out how to make it work as they hear of their eligibility from state agencies tomorrow, June 30th. As many of you know, this year has highlighted the value of offering school meals at no charge to all students. Community eligibility provides an excellent opportunity for high poverty schools and districts to continue to offer free breakfast and lunch to all students, even beyond the pandemic in the 2021-2022 school year. The goal of this webinar is to provide strategies and resources for successfully implementing community eligibility, to hear from a school nutrition director about their experience and best practices, and to answer any questions you may have about community eligibility for your school or district. We have a full agenda today. Next slide, Nomi. So I just want to go over briefly the schedule for our webinar. First, I am going to give a brief overview of community eligibility and how it has been so beneficial to many schools, even with the pandemic waivers. After that, I am really excited to hear from our speaker, Susan Robertson, who's the Director of School Nutrition Services for Richmond City Public Schools in Virginia. After that, I will briefly go over some of FRAC's resources on community eligibility, and we will be saving our question and answer session for the end. But feel free throughout the webinar to use the Q&A function on your screen to submit any questions that you have at any point during the conversation. Next slide. All right, so let's get started. Community eligibility, or the CEP, as it's sometimes referred to, allows high poverty schools to provide free breakfast and lunch to all students without having to collect meal applications. Schools are reimbursed using a formula that is based on the proportion of low-income children in the school or district, using a figure called the Identified Student Percentage, or ISP. Any school or district can use this option if at least one of its schools has 40% or more students certified for free meals without an application. The term identified students, or those students certified for free meals without an application, includes those students who are in one of the two following categories. First, children who are directly certified through data matching because their households participate in SNAP, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, or FDIPR, and in some states, Medicaid. The second group is children who are certified for free meals without an application because they're experiencing homelessness, migrant, enrolled in Head Start, or in foster care. This ISP is then multiplied by 1.6 to get the percentage of meals that are reimbursed by the federal government at the free rate. So schools with an ISP of 62.5 or higher receive the free federal reimbursement for 100% of meals served. Now, I know this sounds a little complicated, but I'm going to talk about why community eligibility is so beneficial on the next slide. So in normal times, community eligibility offers schools and students a wide variety of benefits. Schools that participate in community eligibility often see increased participation in school meals, allowing more students to experience the many educational and health benefits linked to school meal participation. And schools no longer have to collect and process school meal applications, which reduces administrative costs and paperwork, allowing school nutrition staff to focus more on offering healthy, appealing meals to students. Further, offering meals at no charge to all students eliminates the stigma from perception that school meals are only for low-income children and facilitates the implementation of other alternative service models such as breakfast after the bell. During the 2020-2021 school year, many schools and districts across this country chose to offer free school meals to all through the summer nutrition programs, thanks to waiver authority granted by the U.S. Department of Agriculture because of the pandemic. However, more schools did sign up for community eligibility in the 2020-2021 school year, even if they didn't officially operate the provision. And as you can see on the numbers that we pulled from our most recent report on the slide, In the 2020-2021 school year, almost 5,500 districts and over 33,000 schools adopted community eligibility, serving 15.5 million students, which was an increase of over 2,500 schools when compared to the previous school year. Next slide. And in particular, I want to talk about why adopting community eligibility for the upcoming school year is important. From what we've observed during the pandemic, there has been an increase in need among families across the country due to the economic hardship caused by the pandemic, which has led in turn to an increase in families becoming eligible for and participating in SNAP benefits. As a result, more schools are becoming eligible to implement community eligibility. This has also led to higher ISPs in many schools, which allow schools to claim higher federal reimbursements for meals, making community eligibility more viable option financially for many schools and districts. And then last month, we saw USDA extend the summer waivers that have been so crucial to school meal service during the pandemic through the end of the next school year, which is the 2021-2022 school year, excuse me. And we're very glad to see this. And we also want to make sure that schools and districts recognize community eligibility as an option to continue to serve students free meals on a 4-year cycle beyond the pandemic. And we want to make sure they take advantage of the higher ISPs observed during the pandemic because of increased need. Locking in higher ISPs for 4 years now can help students and districts serve as many free meals as possible to students once school nutrition operations do return to normal. Next slide. Before turning it over to our speaker, I briefly wanted to go over some details on what community eligibility will look like for next school year. As many of you are already aware, USDA extended key waiver flexibility for community eligibility for next school year, which gives states, districts, and schools more time and flexibility to adopt CEP for the year. We've included some key dates for this year on this slide, including the extended deadline for states to notify schools and districts of their eligibility, which as I said earlier, is tomorrow, June 30th, and the extended deadline for schools and districts to adopt in community eligibility is September 30th. I also just want to flag that we've already heard for some states that they may not be using some of the waiver authorities for community eligibility and in general, so make sure to contact your state agency to clarify what school nutrition operations are going to look like next school year. And I know that it is often helpful to hear directly from somebody who has been offering community eligibility on the ground to hear about their experience, so which is why I'm happy and super excited to kick it off to our fabulous speaker for today, Susan Robertson, who is the Director of School Nutrition Services at Richmond Public Schools in Virginia. Susan, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a busy time for you. It's an exciting time to be able to say that we don't have the headache here that some people are having with applications and even debt. Because of SSO for the upcoming school year, it's still very, very important that we look beyond the times that we're in and prepare for the 22-23 school year by getting enrolled in CEP. Richmond City's been fortunate. We've been in CEP since 2014. That was the first year that we no longer had to be debt collectors to our families. We found that when we grouped all of our schools together, we were originally about 76% free and reduced. When we grouped all our schools together, all of our schools together brought us to a 61.777% ISP, which helped us to be able to claim free for all of our students, even the schools that were as low as 23% free and reduced when we were dealing with the lunch application. The biggest benefit that we found from it was the fact that no longer did we have to have students concerned about whether their parents filled out an application, whether or not we had the right information on that student, because everyone in the district became free. So by the time that we went through our first cycle of CEP, we were able to increase our percentage to 63.83%. And so we continued on up until where we are now under COVID situation, where we are at 68.48. We went down slightly, but the current school year, we are now at 65.7% ISP. What that tells me and tells the families here in this district that no one needs to worry about a application being completed or whether or not we have the information transferred from one school to another, and that students can smoothly have access to breakfast and lunch without any problem of worrying about whether or not they're free, they're reduced, or what, or full paid. This lifted a great burden off of our district because while we don't like to have to contact parents when children don't have lunch money, but we do have a responsibility to be financially we have to be financially sound as a department. And before CEP, we were about $63,000. We had about $63,000 in debt just for collecting bad debt or meals we were serving. So if you're a school system out there that is constantly collecting meals, providing meals for students, and not getting an application and not getting paid for those meals, CEP is just what you need. We have 44 schools in our district, approximately 23,637 students, and originally we were 76% free and reduced. Before the pandemic, we had CEP, but during the pandemic, it made things very easy. All of our families qualified for PEBT because of CEP. Next slide, please. The first year of CEP, we did go district-wide, and that was back in 15-16, where our ISP was 61.77%, 97.61% of our reimbursement was of the free category. Now, this still wasn't 100%, but it was not long after that we did increase that we were able to get 100% of our meal reimbursement rate at the free reimbursement rate. Now, it seems like 97.61 is very close, but to get 100%, it made it still much better. And through the increased income revenue that we received through CEP, we've been able to continue to buy equipment for our schools, keep our staff in uniforms, and pretty much keep up with the minimum wage and exceed the minimum wage in most cases for our school staff employees. We've also been able to continue to pay a lot of the other things that we've been self-sufficient during this whole period prior to CEP, prior to COVID. Of our 43 schools this particular school year, we're excited because we won't have to do any application renewal. We are continuing to increase our free eligibility because as new students come into the school district, they're automatically eligible for CEP. This has been a very smooth situation for our students, and in our building principals do not have to worry about long lines because we're struggling with whether or not an individual student is free, reduced. But during the CEP transition and continuing into CEP, we continue to utilize our point of sale system because we wanted to be able to continue to capture all of our students. Next slide. We have 45 sites going into this particular school year. Once again, we're going to be CEP, but we've actually increased You might want to go 2 more slides up. We've actually increased to the point now that we have more students enrolled, and 100% of our reimbursement is at the free status, and we are at a 63.48% ISP. This has helped us once again and will continue to help us as we move after COVID, because school year 22-23, we don't know what it's going to be like, but we do know by having CEP, we will not have to worry about eligibility determination processes for our students. This is what makes CEP ideal, because it's very important that we look beyond COVID. Right now, with all the waivers, everyone is eating under SSO in the upcoming school year. But I think it would be very beneficial to each school district to evaluate if you have eligible schools out there who already qualify, to look at pairing your schools together to see if you can come up with the formula that would work to bring your ISP to be eligible, that all your buildings, all your sites could be CEP. This is the right thing to do for our students. No student should have to go through a hassle of filling out an application, or really depending on their families to fill out an application, when this wonderful program of community eligibility is available. I would encourage everyone to at least give it a serious look. With the changes in the economy due to COVID, having this as a value-added program in your school could make the difference for many families who this meal that we serve is the only meal that they may have access to in a very formalized way. 100% may not be achievable for everyone, but just looking into it, filling out the application, and really making every effort to see how many students in your school system will qualify for CEP, how many sites you can group together, would be a great thing to do, and will be sort of like a gift for your parents to not have to worry about an application. There's been a lot of questions asked, how do I figure out, different processes? How will the school determine their Title I? All of this is achievable. Just take the first step by filling out the application and seeing how many buildings in your school you can put together in some combination, if not all of them, to make sure that your students have an opportunity to function under CEP. I would welcome your questions, because I think by hearing your questions, I can help you maybe lose any fears or reservations you may have about CEP. But for Richmond City, CEP was created for us. It was such a smooth transition for us to not have to fill out applications that parents were not returning. We never had to worry about having the charge system in place, because we weren't getting our money for those meals anyway. And we didn't have to remove trays or think about telling a child, sorry, but you don't have an application on file, because it's an adult problem, and it should be solved by every adult by looking at CEP as the way to go. So our families are grateful to us. Of course, we had some families who couldn't even believe it, that their meal was going to be free with no paperwork. But eventually they understood that, hey, you don't have to fill out an application anymore. You just have to enroll in school, and all of that's taken care of. So once again, I encourage everyone to take a look. Ask yourself, can we help our families ease the burden of processing applications? And can we make it a smooth transition for our students, so that no one has to fill out an application? No one has to feel like, oh, I don't have enough money for my child to provide them with meals. And fill out the application for CEP. Here in Richmond, as I said, it was the right thing to do. I wish that the minute CEP was created prior to 2013-14, we were in CEP, because CEP was created to benefit the families, and it's up to us as directors to make sure that benefit gets to all the families out there who are eligible, and so that it can make it a smooth transition and we can focus in on many other things in our department besides the paper chase of applications.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm really interested in hearing more about this current slide about the average daily participation and how CEP has helped with participation in your schools.
Okay. Well, what happened with participation, that next slide, with the participation, we were able to see it increase because a lot of stigma was attached to whether or not you came through and you were classified as free or reduced. While all of our students used a PIN number and no one was supposed to know what the eligibility of one student was over the other, students are smart. They know that if you put the PIN number in and there was no exchange of money at the point of sale, students realized and understood that there were some students who were free. And students felt uncomfortable participating because of that. Since everyone became free, meaning no exchange of money for lunch or breakfast at the point of sale, all students felt more comfortable, especially the upper grades of the middle and high school. They all felt more comfortable coming through the line because there was no longer the stigma attached to students who were quote unquote classified as free or reduced meals. Students are very, very smart. They know what other students are doing. So it was a benefit to us because no longer did anyone have to come through and pay money for their meal. Of course, if you have a la carte, there's always an exchange for snacks. But students are smart enough to know, well, this child's buying ice cream, so that's why they're giving cash. But all of our meals, by taking that stigma away, we no longer had to, the students were not concerned about whether or not they had lunch money. Nobody was being turned away at the point of sale with a lunch because for a lunch or for a breakfast because they didn't have an application. So if we take a look at the data, we can see that it went up and down, but the biggest reason for the increase was because the stigma was gone, that there was no longer a need for lunch money in the lunch line.
All right, well, thank you so much for that incredible insight, Susan. I want to go off onto the next slide because before we go off onto our question and answer session, I wanted to flag some tools that FRAC has proudly put together to help districts and schools make community eligibility work for you, all of which are available at fraccep.org, which you'll see on the slide. The first one that I want to share is our CEP grouping tool, which and I know that there were some questions about this in the chat, and this is a tool that allows school districts and other stakeholders to strategically group schools to maximize the federal funding a school district will receive if they adopt community eligibility. What you can do with this tool is you can upload a list of schools with the name, the enrollment number, the number of identified students, and the ISP. And what it'll do is it will group the schools together to maximize ISPs within groups. And you can say how many groups you want. You can say what your target ISP is. It's very flexible and very helpful. Next slide. The next set of tools that we have are our CEP financial calculators, which can help schools and districts gauge the financial viability of operating community eligibility. And there are 3 of these tools. There's a break-even calculator, a district-level calculator, and a school-level calculator. We have web interfaces available for the first 2 calculators, and the last is available as a downloadable Excel spreadsheet if you really want to crunch the numbers in that amount of detail. Next slide. The break-even calculator allows you to use your ISP and some basic information about your school nutrition operations to calculate participation needed in breakfast, lunch, supper, and/or snack to break even with using CEP. Next slide. And then the district level calculator, on the other hand, allows you to dig deeper to look at expenses and revenue under community eligibility by school type. So and compare implementing community eligibility in your current operations. So you can compare elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and preschools as well, if you, depending on how you want to upload the information. Next slide. And at this time, I am going to turn it over to our audience for questions. It looks like we've got some great questions over here in the chat. So I'm going to start picking off from some of these, but if you have a burning question, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the window to enter a question, and we'll be happy to answer for you. So one of the questions I see is there an extra benefit of adopting CEP for the 2021-2022 school year, even though school meals will already be free for all students? And yes, there is. Because CEP runs on a 4-year cycle, locking in and adopting CEP now will allow you to lock in a higher ISP that we've seen in many places because of the economic hardship during the pandemic. So that's going to allow as many schools to receive as high a reimbursement rate as possible for 4 years following adopting CEP. And luckily, a good thing with CEP is that if you're at any point during the 4-year cycle, if you notice that your ISP has gone up, you can adopt CEP to use that higher ISP, but if your ISP does go down, you do not have to use that lower ISP. You can continue with the original ISP that you adopted in the base year, and it'll carry on for the 4 years. So the benefit of adopting this year is to lock in that ISP for the next 4 years. So, in the 2022-2023 school year, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what school nutrition operations are going to look like. So locking in CEP now, even if people are offering free meals through the summer waivers in this school year, it's going to allow schools to continue to offer those free meals as long as possible after the pandemic is over. Looks like we've got a question about does the school district need to submit any paperwork to take advantage of the waiver extension for September 30th? And to my knowledge, that is not the case, but do you have any insight to that, Susan?
If the question is whether or not they have to submit paperwork to have, If the question is whether or not you have to have paperwork to have the waiver for CEP, is that what the question is?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have the paperwork to have a waiver for CEP. That's not one of the waivers for this particular upcoming school year, but your State Department should be providing you with all of the waivers that you do need to complete this particular school year. But it's important that you do, as Allison said, that you do go on and look into CEP this year so that you can capture a high ISP number this year, and it will carry you through the next 4 years, which would include the year after the 22-23 school year. So I'm not familiar with whether or not you have to do a waiver this particular year. That would be within your State Department. I mean, we didn't have to fill out a waiver for that because we were already in CEP.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely highly recommend reaching out to your State Department to clarify what things are going to look like for next school year. And then another question we have is, we are a CEP school year for the 2020-2021 school year. Will we need to reapply? And the answer to that question is that it depends. If this is the last year in your 4-year cycle, then you will need to reapply. But if you're already enrolled in CEP, you do not necessarily have to reapply for CEP. Susan, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I would just say that you need to evaluate to make sure that the data from your April 1st enrollment, if it's higher, you might want to make sure that if you increase your ISP, that might be a benefit for you to make sure you update that information, which would cause you to start over into a new base year. So once again, in our particular states, and when we evaluated ours, we've increased. So we definitely are starting our 4-year cycle over again, even though we're not actually in need of it because of the SSO we're going to be under, but we're starting a new base year because our ISP numbers increased again. So it would be important for you to evaluate that and make a decision if it's higher to capture it in this particular school year, even though we're all under SSO. Hope that
That's
makes sense.
Yeah, that's correct. And I know we've gotten another question about that. So just to clarify, you can't, if you are already enrolled in CEP, you can redo your numbers this year so that you can lock in those higher numbers to get the higher reimbursement rate. I see another question about what the lowest percentage that qualifies for CEP is, and the answer to that question is an identified student number of 40%. Currently, under current law, you need an ISP of 40%, so 40% identified students within the student population that are directly certified. And Nomi, actually, could you go back to slide, I think it was slide 4? Or slide 3, actually. There we go. So as you can see on the slide, you have the students that are directly certified for community eligibility for free meals through data matching because of their participation in SNAP or TANF or FDIPR, or if they're homeless, migrant, enrolled in Head Start or in foster care. It is not, the CEP is not based on the number of students that apply for free meals through an application. It is solely based on direct certification. So it is 40, and that number is 40%. And then I got another question about the child nutrition reauthorization process. And as many of you know, in the American Families Plan, there were provisions that the administration proposed to lower the ISP needed to 25% for elementary schools and or for 25 to 25% across the board, and then to raise the multiplier of 1.6 to 1.9 for middle and high schools and 2.5 for elementary schools. Right now, it is unclear as to when the child nutrition reauthorization process will happen. It seems that there's some movement towards child nutrition reauthorization sometime in the fall or late in the year. But given that the infrastructure packages are sort of moving right now, and it looks like there might be a budget reconciliation, that it's unclear as to what is going to be included in those packages. But if you're interested in CEP, definitely contact your members of Congress, and definitely contact congressional leadership. And the members and the leaders of committees, the relevant committees in the House and the Senate, to urge them to talk about community eligibility, including those provisions. And then another thing that we're also very passionate about at FRAC is we're also very much promoting healthy school meals for all in the budget reconciliation. And we have resources on our website about both CEP and about healthy school meals for all. So feel free to look us up at frac.org. For more information about that. So we have a question in the chat, and I think Susan, you would be a good person to answer for this question. But it says, since SSO can be used this year, Isn't it going to be difficult to convince schools to get things together to apply in the next few months? As an advocacy org, we're really struggling with that right now.
It may be difficult if we just look at now, but I think it's important that we focus everyone beyond where we are now and look ahead to the year after this year. You know, as a department, we're all going to be faced with a new norm come when all this COVID waivers are over with. So to help lay a foundation for the future beyond where we are now, I think it would be very much uh, to your advantage to encourage everyone to say, hey, it's important that we get in CEP now because what we're faced with now with the waivers is only temporary. But what we're going to be faced with after the waivers are families who are in a new economical bracket. They're going to be families that are continuing to struggle. So we need to make it as easy for them as possible and get CEP in our schools now before we get out of the waiver time. So it may seem like it's difficult, but it should be easy to let people know that what we're under now is only temporary. Let's build beyond where we are now and look towards the 22-23 school year.
Absolutely. And another, just to add on to everything that Susan said, which I 100% agree with, it's going to be, if you are a school or a district that is eligible for CEP and the waivers, the SSO waivers are not extended for the 22 or 23 school year, it's going to be really hard to tell a lot of families that they will no longer be able to receive a free breakfast and lunch for their students, especially given how we've seen how important that offering those free breakfasts and lunch is to students has been in alleviating food insecurity for students during the pandemic. So we're all on board with CEP and making sure that students continue to receive those meals beyond the pandemic. I'm looking at the Q&A function and it doesn't seem like we've had any more questions come in, so I'm just going to ask this question of Susan to wrap us up. If you could just, you've brought up a lot of really, really good points as to why CEP is so great for your district and for districts that are eligible. If you could just sum it up in maybe a sentence or two, what is the biggest benefit do you see of using community eligibility in your schools?
I believe the biggest benefit has been just the smooth processes that we go through to feed our students. Breakfast in the classroom is easy with CEP. We're not troubled with those kinds of processes of collecting money and identifying students. It's just been a smooth. It's just been so smooth that we have not had to be concerned about a student's eligibility, and we can put all of our energies and all of our time and focus on providing our students with opportunities for meals without the headaches of determining their eligibility. And it's been easy for our buildings also, for our building administrators to not have to be caught up in that because it wasn't a fun time prior to CEP with what we had to go through. So I say CEP is definitely a value added benefit that we should make sure that all of our families that are eligible should have an opportunity to experience.
Excellent. I don't think I could have said it better myself. So I think with that, I think we're going to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank every one of our participants for joining us today, and a true heartfelt thank you to Susan for joining us and for sharing her incredible expertise. As Nomi said earlier, the recording and resources that we mentioned during this webinar will be shared in a follow-up email. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.